Did you know you can paint over stained wood cabinets and not have to sand off the finish first? Or that any beginner can use a paint sprayer to get a professional smooth finish? I am so excited to share this class where I walk you step by step and teach you everything that you need to know about painting cabinets with a paint sprayer. View of the actual cabinets that I'm going to be painting and transforming them from this old, outdated, reddish brown stain into a beautiful new light blue. The other reason I wanted to start out in the actual bathroom and show you the cabinets themselves is there's some things that I need you to look at in your bathroom. First of all, we are going to be removing all of the hardware that's on our cabinet, so the pulls and the knobs. The other thing is we're going to be taking off the drawer fronts and also the cabinet doors. So I want you to get familiar, stick your head inside your cabinet and figure out how everything is attached. You're always going to have a faceplate where your sink is, and that typically is attached two different ways. One is with clips, and you literally can just pull it off and you'll be able to see the clips back here. Mine is screwed to the actual base of this cabinet. And so there's two little screws that I can get up in there with a screwdriver and just pop this plate off. The other thing is with drawers, most of the time they are attached to a base as well. And if you look inside, you'll see where those two areas join. And again, there's just some Phillips head screws, and you just unscrew them and take the actual drawer front off. So the order we're going to be painting is we're going to be spraying everything first, and then we're going to hand apply second. So the base cabinets, we're going to be hand applying the paint using a brush and a foam roller. This literally will feel like it takes the longest versus spraying. Spraying will go really, really fast and doesn't take a lot of paint. The reason we start out spraying is obviously we're going to have to flip over our cabinet doors and drawer fronts to spray both sides. So while we're waiting for one side to dry, you'll go back into your bathroom and go ahead and start applying the primer or the paint to the base. There are a few supplies that I'd like you to gather before we start taking off the doors and the drawers. One is a power drill with a Phillips head attachment. If you don't have one, a Phillips head screwdriver will be helpful, but take you a little bit longer. The other is small or medium-sized Ziploc bags or plastic bags, whatever you have handy. You can even use grocery bags or a reusable bag. What we're going to need those for is storing our hardware and also our hinges. And last but not least, grab some type of a marker. Sharpie is preferable, so grab a Sharpie marker, because once we take everything off, especially if you have a lot of doors and you have a lot of drawers, we're going to want to make sure we label everything so it's much easier to put it all back later. I just removed my drawer front using my power drill, a Phillips head attachment. I just wanted to show you what it looks like. So typically you're going to have a panel like this that's attached to a base frame. So it'll just slide in and out. You don't have to worry about the fact that you removed the cabinet hardware. The other thing that I'll do, and I just did, is I'll store the actual cabinet hardware, so the knobs, the pulls, the cup pulls, inside the drawer or the cabinet where they belong with all of the hardware that attaches them. That makes life so much easier because everything is handy when you're ready to put everything back. Let's talk about hinge types. So there's several types of hinges. Mine's called a concealed hinge. You may have hinges that are actually on the face of your cabinet, and they are going to be directly screwed into the door and the base of the cabinet. So you would just unscrew those and remove those and keep that hardware handy. If you have the kind that screw into the base itself and screw into the door, on the back side still concealed and not quick release, again, you'll unscrew those. Or if you're lucky like me and you have a newer home, my home is about 13 years old, I have these quick release hinges. So I'll pop this one door off on camera just to show you how easy this quick release system is. Ta-da! Ta-da! Great, right? I'm pretty lucky and I'm happy that my cabinet doors come off so easily. The other thing I wanted to show you is if you have this type of hinge, it's really easy to remove it from the door itself. I use a little Phillips head screwdriver and see how that pops out? And then it just comes out of the cabinet. You may find that once you pop it out, it's drilled directly into the cabinet door. So just be mindful of that. After you remove your door or drawer, we need to label the position that it's going to go back. So you need a little Sharpie marker, and anywhere that hinge was that you have removed, you'll see underneath there'll be a space that you can label the location of the door or the drawer. So I just wrote RM for right main. So I know that it's the right door for this main base cabinet. And this obviously will be the left main. And then I'll just call this left. Then what we're gonna do, and you only need to label one of the hinge locations, and I'm trying to do this blindly, but you're gonna get a piece of painter's tape that's about the same size as this location. And you're gonna go ahead and tape over that label. So when we spray, you'll be able to pull off this painter's tape and it will reveal what location it is. So hopefully I did that really, really well. Next, once you get everything off, you can take off the cabinet pulls. Now, labeling the drawer fronts is really, really important. And what I have found as I put the drawer fronts back on, making sure you have the right one in the right location will save you a lot of heartache and headache. Because there are screw holes that need to align to reattach it to the drawer itself. And you want to make sure you put the right drawer front on the right drawer base. So you are also going to label back behind here. Remember, this is going to be attached, so you're not going to see this label. You will put a piece of painter's tape, and I'll do that in a second. But the main thing I want you to pay attention to is direction. This is the way it faces up. So you don't want to rotate it over. You want to make sure as you remove it, you pay attention. I can tell by where my hardware holes are that this is up. So write it in the direction of how it's going to be replaced back onto that drawer base. Then just like we did with the hinges, we're going to put a little painter's tape directly over our label, and it's okay. We're going to spray right over that. This is going to go back on here and you'll never see it. Just two other little tips about cabinet doors in particular. To keep everything organized and neat and ready to go when you have to reassemble everything, put your hinges and your hardware into a bag, one each per door. Then label it with the same label that you used for inside that hinge. So this one is left main. The other thing that you want to be mindful of is if you have any silicone stoppers that help your doors from pounding, you're going to want to go ahead and peel those off. We're going to clean off that adhesive later, but you can keep these little things inside that same bag. I literally will stick it inside the bag like this so I can find it easier later. Here's what everything looks like now that the drawers and the cabinet doors have been removed. And it's really nice that I've got such a significant change of stain and the cabinet base is white, so I can show you the areas that you're going to need to look at your home and figure out what it is that you're going to need to tape off and to also prime and paint. So obviously all these areas I'm going to be priming and painting. I'll be taping off to the inside of the frame and over the drawer front. I'll be taping under the actual counter itself, along the wall, which you can't see, it's off camera. The other thing is I always leave everything inside the cabinets and I'll just throw a little painter's plastic over it. You can do the same thing at your home. We're not getting real crazy in here with brushing and rolling, so that should be perfectly fine. Trying to film painting this is going to be challenging. Hopefully I can figure it out because the toilet's right here. But there is a whole panel that looks just like the cabinet doors that I'm going to have to paint by hand back over here. If you have a toilet paper holder attached to your cabinet like I do, you'll need to remove that as well. So don't forget about it because it's best when you have all your tools out and you can just go ahead and take care of that. So hopefully that gets you primed, pun intended, and ready to get painting. Another situation you may be faced with is you want to change hardware, or when you remove something, there's multiple holes behind there. So when I took off my toilet paper holder, I did not install it, somebody else did. I found they drilled in several times and moved things around, so I don't know what happened there. But there's this cool stuff called Quickwood. Weird name, I know, but it comes in a long tube and it looks like this. You just cut it off and you knead it together. And I'll show you what I'm going to do with this, and you're going to press it into anywhere that you have holes. What's cool about this Quickwood is you're blending it together to mix it, turning it into one solid color, so it's going to take about a minute for me to do this. But once you fill those holes, you actually can re-drill them. So it's really, really nice if you have to do any repairs, and I'll show you some close-up footage of what I'm doing, but I just sand down the area a little bit, put a little bit of Quickwood in there, let it dry, and then sand it down before I ever get painting. So here's a little tip. If you want to change out hardware or change the holes, you can use some Quickwood. So you just take a little piece of putty and push it into those holes that you want to repair. We're going to let that dry and sand it down before we ever get cleaning or priming. I followed the same process for my cabinet drawer front, but I put a little piece of tape in the back to hold the Quickwood in place as I pressed it into the old drill holes. So just another tip, if you want to change out the hardware, you can do that too. Are you ready to get cleaning? This is going to be the easiest part of the job. So you're going to start with your pre-paint cleaner. I'm starting with the face side down because we want to flip over and make sure that face is really nice and clean and let that sit the longest. Once you apply the pre-paint cleaner, we'll be able to go ahead and set up and spray within 10 minutes, but in all honesty, it's going to take you longer to set up the paint sprayer and get ready for that. So not to worry about the dry time of the pre-paint cleaner. So I'm going to just start on this one since it's in the center. Just generously spray the pre-paint cleaner on the surface. Use your microfiber rag with your gloved hands and start cleaning. I did clean this table really, really well before getting started just to make sure that I don't redeposit anything. Something that I want to mention to you is when you get everything nice and clean, the next time you touch your cabinet doors and drawers, I want you to always have on gloved hands. We don't want to redeposit any of that grease and grime that's just naturally going to come off of our hands onto the cabinets. Something I want to mention is you can see my cabinet doors and drawers are, when we kicked off the video, are in really, really good shape. I am not having to do any sanding whatsoever, but say you have some failing areas, you'll need to make sure those are slightly sanded and cleaned up. I would do that before you do the pre-paint cleaner. So all you would do is, and I'll have this in your supply list, is take your 220 grit sanding block, which we always need to have on hand when we're doing paint projects, and lightly sand those areas and get all that sanding dust off before you ever do the pre-paint cleaner. Luckily, I don't have to do any of that work. I wish I could show you on camera, but I just don't have any issues. These are pretty intact cabinets. So I'm not gonna bore you with cleaning my cabinets on camera. Next time you see me, we'll be going through loading the primer, getting it ready for the paint sprayer, and then I'll walk you through the setup before we get spraying. So you see my appearance has changed. I've got everything set up, ready to start spraying my cabinet doors and drawers and teach you exactly how to do that. So of course, we want to protect ourselves while we are spraying. Obviously, we're aerating paint, so it's important to protect our lungs. So definitely, if you just have a regular medical mask, that's fine. Or if you have something a little more heavy duty, like you would use for landscaping, that works too. The other thing is, because you're going to be walking around and spraying down, I love to have slip on and off shoes because I can take them off so I don't track paint any further than right where I am spraying. You can see these are well loved and also very comfortable. They're Merrells, if you're wondering. The other thing you can see is I've got a baseball hat on, so I like to just generally protect my hair. Not a ton of paint will get in it, but again, that paint is flying around, so I just like to wear a baseball hat. Sometimes you'll bump into the edge of the spray tent, so it's more you want to protect the top of your hair. My ponytail is going to be just fine. I won't get any paint in it. And then last but not least, we need to protect our eyes and wear some sort of glasses, whether they be safety glasses or just regular old glasses. It doesn't really matter, but safety first, my friend. So let's talk about getting ready to use our sprayer. So here is the cup that came with the sprayer itself. And what we are going to do, and you're going to be really surprised that I'm going to do this, is we're going to pour probably this entire can of bonding primer into this cup. The more full the cup is, the better, because there's a little thing that's going to be sucking the paint up, that if you turn back and forth, that the more primer is in there, the more consistent the spray is going to be. So give your bonding primer a good shake, stir everything up. You can see I've got a nice piece of cardboard here. Doesn't matter that you shake this, it's not going to hurt anything. We will not be doing that with our cabinet paint. We'll stir that. We will also not be thinning our bonding primer. The type of sprayer that we're using has enough force to push this thick material. I've never had a problem with it. So we're going to dump all of this in here to fill it up as much as possible. And whatever we don't use, we're going to dump right back into our can. You can see in the camera, this whole quart didn't even fill up this entire container. It's about right here, which is great because that little tube will go down into this cup and it will be perfectly fine. So I'm gonna go slide this over and we are gonna talk about the settings on the paint sprayer. Okay, so let's talk about the paint sprayer settings and just get familiar with the paint sprayer itself. So the first thing you're gonna do is you're going to attach this piece. It goes right in here and it clicks into place. Okay, so don't be scared to force it into place. And I'm just gonna kind of work front to back just to tell you basically the things that we're gonna be doing. So there's a dial that controls vertical or horizontal position. Because we're gonna be spraying side to side, we are gonna be going in a vertical orientation, not a horizontal orientation. So I hope that makes sense. The other thing is there's a dial right here that tells you how wide of a pattern you are going to spray. So there's a dial right here, it's red. This is actually the material flow. So how much material is going to be projected out with the air pushing it through. So I like to be pretty conservative right now. I've got it set at a 3, but really until you start spraying, it's hard to know exactly what that's going to be. Then this is our air control. So this is how much air is being sucked in and pushed through. And what's nice is they've got a little gauge on here that it's, for a really max power. If you're going to be doing a house, you go to the highest setting. And if you're doing just a small piece of furniture, it's like a 3 or a 4. So I'm going to start out a little higher just because this is a thicker material because we're using bonding primer, and then when we switch to Valspar cabinet and furniture enamel, then I will dial it back. And you can see this is the tube that's going to suck up the primer. Then last but not least, there's an on and off switch, so don't be surprised if all of a sudden you turn this thing on and it doesn't work. You may have not turned on or off. There's a 0 and a 1. So 1 is on, 0 is off. There's a left and a right toggle depending on how you're holding your sprayer. Okay, so I hope that helps. And then like I mentioned, we're gonna have to plug in our sprayer, and we're gonna attach, all you do is, so all you're gonna do to get the primer, and actually what you should do, hold on, so I'm going to unattach this piece and get it started onto our container that has the primer in it. Just spin that on top. Make sure you get it nice and tight. Then, as I showed you before, we're gonna click this into place. And ta-da, that's all that it takes to set up a paint sprayer. So I thought I'd talk you through my little spray tent world setup. So first of all, you can see where I have all of the plastic laid down. Then I have lots of cardboard spread everywhere. We want to make sure that we keep the plastic down when that paint sprayer gets going and the airflow starts going, so we want to keep it down. Plus, from a safety perspective, it makes it so it's not slippery. I have slipped on plastic before, so I learned my lesson. Always put some cardboard down over the plastic. So it's mainly where you're going to be stepping and walking. Also, that'll pull some of the paint off your shoes before you walk away. The other thing is I have some trim boards back here. I am going to open up my garage door just slightly. It's just to prevent anything from blowing in, and I just wanted to weight down the back side of my spray tent. Sometimes it has a tendency to lift up because the wind will start blowing in. Then you can see I've got my drawer fronts and my doors about evenly spaced. So you want to give yourself enough distance in between everything so you can spray around the frames, and also give yourself enough that you can get in back and spray the other side as well. Then the other thing is you can see that I've got the cones in place, and I have so much architectural detail in my particular style of cabinet door. So I tried to tuck those little pinpoint cones into the architectural detail, so when I'm flipping these over, that it's hitting like the smallest, narrowest point that won't be shown. And then last but not least, and it's a really important piece of this puzzle, I want you to start spraying the back side of the cabinet first. So if you've wavered in your attention, this is the most important thing. Always start on the back side first, and we're gonna let this dry and flip it over later. So those are just some details before we ever get started, and you can hear me before I turn on my paint sprayer. You can see I've got all my gear on, I've changed my shoes, and I've got my little mask ready to go. So based on the thickness of bonding primer, I have the settings on 7 and 7. So airflow of 7 and pressure of 7. I always test on a piece of cardboard before I ever spray my cabinets. Notice how I start the spray just before the cabinet and do long sweeping motions back and forth. I'm always keeping 6 to 8 inches away and overlapping just slightly where I was before. It's nice and easy to see this process as I'm going over the stain, so you can see as I'm pressing and releasing how the product is coming out. Make sure you don't over apply. So that's why I'm keeping just a long sweeping motion as I glide across each cabinet and overlap each time. Now, depending on what sprayer you have, either you have a cord or a tube, and you must be mindful of it so it does not drag across what you're painting. Trust me, I've had that happen before. Definitely bend down, look around, and spray around the edges. You can tilt and move the sprayer in all kinds of different directions as long as you maintain that sweeping motion and you keep 6 inches away. You can turn your sprayer because that little tube is pulling the primer up inside. Just make sure you get all of the edges and work your way around all the sides. So you want to completely cover the top and the sides all the way around each cabinet, door, and drawer front. Now, if you ever hear squealing, keep a damp paper towel with you to clean off the sprayer nozzle.
See how fast that went? Something I forgot to mention, and I should have mentioned this at the start, but you'll see this before you get started. Always keep a damp paper towel handy to wipe off that nozzle, because that air is drying the primer so fast, it gets gunky, and I could see little speckles were forming, so I knew that it was time to go get a damp paper towel. The other thing is, you see before I stopped that I just walked around. The edges are gonna get sprayed twice, because when we flip this over, you're gonna get good even coverage, but if you have architectural detail, you can see that I was turning and making sure that I got into all of these little grooves. So, what's next? We're gonna let all this dry for 1 hour, then we're gonna flip everything over and do the face. So hopefully you feel confident and ready to go and use your sprayer. I'll see you in an hour. Okay, so it's been 1 hour. We're gonna flip over our cabinet doors and drawer fronts, and we're gonna do it very carefully and very gently. I want you to take the time and be ultra careful as you flip everything over. And that primer should not be gunked up or dried up in there, so that's why we only wait 1 hour, because we don't wanna let that sprayer sit too long, because the primer will dry up in there and we don't want that. All right, I'm gonna get flipping. It's going to be really important is making sure, if you have architectural detail on the face of your cabinets, to really get in there. You don't want to get your paint sprayer too close. You don't want to apply too much pressure. It would be better to do 2 coats than to force that primer down in there. But you'll be surprised, with enough quick passes, you'll be able to get the primer in those little grooves, and we're only going to have to do 1 coat. So much easier than hand applying. Don't forget your damp paper towel.
Okay, you can see I'm moving much faster on the side, and as you build your confidence, you will too. But again, you always start before the face of the cabinet and you make long sweeping passes. I'm pressing and releasing the trigger so we don't waste our primer. And you overlap slightly because you don't want to over apply in any one area. Now, because the way the product is being pulled up into the sprayer, you can definitely vary your angle to get into those architectural grooves if you need to, and tip and turn the paint sprayer. Just make sure you don't over apply and you apply a lot of thin coats. Last reminder, watch out for that cord so it doesn't drag across any of your beautiful work.
So next, we are going to pour the bonding primer back into the can. And we have got to clean out our paint sprayer before we put paint in there tomorrow. So when we go ahead and paint 12 hours from now or overnight, we'll be able to get a fresh, clean coat of paint out of there. Let's put that bonding primer back into our can so we can save it for another project. What you need to do is release the handle. So you just push down on this little button and it's gonna twist off. Luckily, this is nothing that we have to worry about cleaning. So you can set that aside. Then you're gonna unscrew the top. And the reason I have cardboard here is this is gonna get a little bit messy. And there is a ton of primer that's still within this mechanism. So I just want you to be mindful of that. So I'm gonna try to tap some of that down. Then I'm going to set that aside and have a stir stick handy. You're going to scrape the inside of your container to get as much bonding primer off of the sides and the bottom, because you can see I was moving the sprayer around quite a bit. And we're just going to dump it back into the can. And then next, I'll show you in the sink how we're going to clean everything and get it ready for our paint. Yay! Pop this out like that, and we're going to rinse with warm water, hot water, as hot as you can stand. Rinse this out. Oh yeah, keep on your gloves. Just Get that nice and clean. And you can use a sponge and really wipe to get everything off. So that's all clean. I'm going to move this aside, and we're going to open this up as wide as it will go for the max product flow. Pour some water down in there, and then dump it out. See, I'm still getting a lot of paint coming out of here. It always blows my mind. Okay, now I'm going to do my little trigger trick. And first, I'm going to run some hot water and just scrub around here. This is not the manufacturer's instructions, it's just what I do. I have taken these apart before and had problems, so I'm going to do everything I can to not have to disassemble this. And the other thing that's important is there's a filter right here. And my hands aren't big enough. There we go. That what you need to do is replace it or shake it out. But your kit will come with extra filters, so you keep the airflow nice and clean. And then don't get water in here, but you can wipe this area down. I'm not going to do that. This sponge is no good. Here, I'll do this. So change your filter as well. And then, just to keep things neat and clean, you can wipe down the body. Protect what you just sprayed from everything. Pets, children, bugs, leaves, dust, dirt, while it's a little bit damp. You want to make sure nothing is landing on it. Definitely let this last side dry overnight, so over 12 hours. As I said, it was going to get kind of interesting trying to film in this very small bathroom in this very small space. But this side is really important because it's the only side that we're going to be rolling. So I'm going to do my best to show you as much as I can as possible while getting a good job on my own cabinets and not getting in the way of the camera. So our supplies are a little bit different because we are going to be using a foam roller. We are going to be using a nylon polyester angled sash brush. We're also going to be using the same product. So we're going to be using Valspar Bonding Primer, my favorite thing in the whole wide world. And I've already talked to you about what that is, so you know why we're using it. And then the other thing that we're going to need is a liner and a paint tray. So I wanted to show you how much bonding primer I have in the tray, and it's such goopy stuff, it's amazing. But I don't need a ton because I'm only doing just one side where I'm going to have to roll. So I'm going to get a little bonding primer on my brush and wipe off the excess in the tray. I'm going to take my brush along this edge and start priming. So I'm turning my edge just to go up underneath to make sure I get bonding primer in all the nooks and crannies. As you brush, bonding primer is so thick, it's going to feel really different than a regular latex wall paint. It's going to show every brush mark that you do. So hopefully on camera you can see exactly what I'm talking about. But I just want to give you the gist of how you work the primer in to all of these grooves. So I wanted to show you when you get primer on your roller, you're going to work the primer into the grooves of the tray. Really load up that foam roller. Now what we're gonna do is roll these really big expanses, and I actually can see that I missed that one little section with my brush, so I pushed the primer down in there. And you can see how gnarly the primer looks. You can see every brush stroke, but I promise you, it's all gonna get worked in once we apply the paint. It's coming at it from the other angle. So make sure you bend down, look around, and cover everything with this first coat of primer. We're gonna do 2 coats and see how hard this is for me. And while everything is wet and you have a wet brush, you can manipulate the primer. So that's really it. It's really easy to roll on the bonding primer if you have an easier location than I do. This was all kinds of awkward, but that's why we're gonna do 2 coats of bonding primer anywhere we have to roll. It's just really hard to get good even coverage with the foam rollers. So I'd imagine your cabinet base frame looks a lot like mine, and so the majority or all of what we're gonna be doing is gonna be using the brush with the bonding primer. And try your best not to overwork the primer. Just get it applied and get decent coverage. You can turn your brush this way as well and try to keep everything aligned that you're doing. I tipped the camera angle down just a little bit. I may physically have to lay down to do this. I had to lay down to do the floor before, and I suggest you do it too, just so you can see up under there. But I'm gonna show you painting along this, like the kick plate and the shoe molding. The most important thing is you don't let your cardboard hit that space. So I got a lot of primer on my brush, and I'm gonna just work it up underneath to get good, straight, even coverage. I mean, I feel like a broken record. So now we're finished with coat number 1 of the primer. Let's talk about recoat times. So recoat time is different than dry time. This bonding primer probably will be dry within an hour or so, but the manufacturer suggested recoat time is different. And what that means is how long between coats. When can that first coat receive the second coat without sticking to itself, which is called blocking. So this bonding primer has a recoat time of 2 to 4 hours. You can recoat in 2 hours if it's a cool, not humid day. If you live in a humid climate, it rained for a couple of days prior to you starting to prime and there's a lot of water in the air, I want you to wait 4 hours. And since we're gonna go ahead and reapply so quickly, especially in the 2-hour window, you can go ahead and wrap your brush in plastic. You can wrap your roller in plastic. Stay nice and wet and will not dry out. Depending on how much primer you have in your tray, you can pour the primer back into the can, or if you've got quite a bit of primer in your tray, sorry, I'm looking down at mine, you can throw a piece of plastic saran wrap over the top. So it really depends. So if you want to wait overnight, say you just don't have any more time to paint today, I want you to toss your roller. I want you to toss your paint tray and pour the primer back in. And I want you to rinse out your brush. What we're gonna do is flip over our cabinet doors and drawer fronts. Those cones do leave little like round circle marks. It's on the back side of the cabinet, so I'm not too concerned about it, but what that tells me is I am going to wait longer before I flip them over when we apply our paint, okay? So just be mindful of that. If it really irks you and bothers you, you can go ahead and use your little craft brush and some bonding primer and just gently tap in and fill in those spots. All right, so let's get started with our painting. Let's talk a little bit about Valspar cabinet and furniture enamel. Valspar cabinet and furniture enamel is a hybrid oil enamel. What that means is there's this cool little bead on the inside that acts like oil once it bursts and dries, but the hybrid part of it means it's water cleanup. So soap and water cleanup with the benefits of oil. It's like the perfect paint for using on cabinets and furniture as well. Now, something I wanted to talk to you about is I ended up choosing a satin finish instead of semi-gloss. The reason I picked satin is it's kind of got that chalk paint look. I think the cleanability is going to be just slightly lower than if I were to do a semi-gloss. So semi-gloss is definitely going to have a lot more shine and sheen to it. Satin will give you more of a chalk paint finish and a lower sheen. Semi-gloss will give you a higher finish, which is easier to clean and a little bit harder finish. So something that's a little bit different about this type of paint, it is a little bit thinner than a latex paint that you would use on your walls. And also the recoat time is going to be longer. So we are gonna wait a little bit longer to let this dry before we flip our cabinets over and apply the paint, just because I don't want that little pin mark to come through as much as possible. So just a reminder, please don't shake this paint. Go ahead and stir it really, really well before you dump it into your cup. So yesterday I was not liking how much primer I was dumping down the drain. It didn't feel good, and the kit with the sprayer came with some free liners, so I'm gonna recommend these in the supply list. So we are gonna use a liner for our paint so we can pour our paint back into this way into the can, and also it'll help clean up so we don't have to dump any product down the drain. So all you do is you just place it down inside the cup, and then you fold the edges over the threads like so, and just make sure it's tucked down in there really, really well. Then what we're gonna do is, again, stir your paint, and we're gonna pour the whole can in here because the more paint, the better for the sprayer. And then we'll put it back in the can when we get finished with our project. So what I'd like you to do with the paint sprayer before we attach our paint container to it, I'd like you, this just pops right off, I'd like you to pull it off and wipe to the inside, see if there's any primer up in there. If you cleaned it really well, I know cleaning it takes a long time. Wipe this whole area out. Then the other thing, since we tip our paint sprayer this way, orient this tube facing forward. Okay, so when you put it back in, you want it here because then it's easier for it to suck up the paint. So now we are going to put this on top, screw it into place. Right over that plastic. Don't worry about the plastic. Just make sure it's good and tight. We don't want to lose any paint out of this cup. And then the next thing we do, and I did wipe this down to make it look newer and cleaner. I'm also going to make sure my sprayer is off. Then we're going to take the back of the sprayer and use your thumb. Here, I'll do this. Use your thumb to press this tab and lock it into place. So I'm gonna go ahead and get everything set up in the tent, and next we're gonna be applying our color. Don't forget, your cabinets should be flipped over so the back side is facing up. All handy, mine is actually a little bit wet, I'm gonna squeeze it out, and we're gonna go ahead and get spraying. You are gonna use the same process as you did with the bonding primer. Please make sure you stay 6 to 8 inches away. It's better to do fine sprays. Don't try to force the paint down onto the surface, just light sprays.
As a reminder, always start on the back side of your cabinets first. We also made sure to do a little test spray before we applied it, right? You are doing those nice gliding motions, pressing and releasing the trigger, and making sure you stay 6 to 8 inches away. You can see I'm hearing some squealing, so I'm wiping off that nozzle. With that airflow, it definitely starts drying out paint even faster than the bonding primer. Work around, and you can see I'm having a little struggle with that cord, so make sure it's up and out of the way. If you accidentally drag it over, you can always spray over that area. Just make sure you keep it nice and fine. Don't forget that you can turn the dial vertically or horizontally depending on the details of your cabinets. You can see I'm having a little test spray before I apply it directly to the cabinets.
Now, we are going to let this dry a good 2 hours or more before flipping the cabinets over. I want you to take your damp paper towel because we're going to be letting this sit a while, and make sure you get this nozzle really, really clean, because we don't want the paint to gunk up in there while it's drying. So get that clean, and then we're just gonna let this sit. So painting is gonna be very similar to priming. We are gonna use a brush and a foam roller. We're gonna work top to bottom before we get rolling, keeping that wet edge. The thing that's gonna feel different is it's gonna feel a lot easier to apply the paint. Just a warning, because you've only experienced spraying this paint. It is a little thinner than a typical wall paint, not much, but definitely be really careful as you brush not to overload your brush. And I'll show you that once we get painting, because you don't want it to drip or to run. So, the main thing is I always want you to tap your brush off into the tray and make sure you don't have a ton of paint on your brush when you start painting, just so you get a feel for how this is going to apply. Today I'm going to physically turn myself to paint because I have to tell you I'm pretty sore after sitting so awkwardly yesterday. And I think you still can see my brush and what I'm doing and how I'm applying. So I'm going to start right here because it's the closest to me and apply the paint. Now you can see this is a really pale blue color. And remember, when paint is wet before it dries, it's always going to look a couple shades lighter than it will when it dries. So you're just going to run your brush in nice even strokes over that primer. Now I can feel that my brush, and remember these little corners can be trouble. I can feel that my brush is getting a little bit tacky or sticky. So I'm going to go back and get a little bit more paint. Okay, and you see the nice coverage that we're getting. Now, what we're going to do is we're just going to gently strike off to get all that paint aligned and pull off any heavy areas. Remember, we're going to apply 2 to 3 thin coats of paint. So don't worry about getting perfect coverage on this first coat. It's just the first coat. Now I'm going to paint this corner, and because you can't see it from this camera angle, I'm going to give you a little up close view of how I run my brush down the corner. And I just do it in a long, even stroke without too much paint on my brush. Then I'm going to turn my brush and strike off, just getting all that paint aligned. Now, the nice thing about the Valspar cabinet and furniture enamel, when you brush it, it is not going to behave like the primer did. It will flow and level, and those brush marks will start to just kind of spread out and go away. You're going to be really blown away. You're going to feel like you're a professional painter when you paint with this paint. So I just want to show you how I edge. Sorry, my head's in the way. But just long, even strokes. It's really hard. This is just a tough camera angle. But I'm going to get this edge started. The other thing is I want to make sure I run my brush back and forth in this groove, in this channel, to get that paint worked in. Really pushing the paint into this detail. I'm going to turn my brush and run it down this angled area to get the paint forced into this detail and molding. And remember, we're not trying to get full coverage. We're just trying to get our first coat of paint on and do a good job trying not to create as many brush marks as possible. And I'm going to strike off and strike off. So I really pushed the paint into my roller. I worked it into the tray. I just wanted you to see how much paint is on my roller before I get rolling. So again, we're going to do nice, long, even strokes. And because there isn't, even though I tried to get a lot of paint in my roller, I'll probably have to go back and get more. You see how I flipped over my roller? Because I knew there was more paint there. I stopped because things are feeling sticky and tacky, so I'm going to go back and get a little more paint. Because of where I am and how I'm having to paint this, I'm going to run my roller across, which is perfectly fine, because what are we going to do, my friend? We are going to strike off. So get in as close as you can to the edges. So now we're going to strike off very gently, very lightly. I'm flipping my ruler over to get in as close as I can to the corners. Now, while you have a wet brush, I want you to look around and see if there's any pooling paint. Gently, don't put any more paint back on your brush, but just pull your brush through those areas very carefully We want to avoid drips. Yes, there's all kinds of awkward angles as I have to paint this bathroom physically laying down on the floor. So I laid down to paint this side and along this kick plate. So I'll show you some film footage of me doing that as well. Just so you see at your house, this is an important area because it's where people's feet are going to be kicking and hitting. So I want to make sure we get good, thorough coverage, but don't over apply. This is just coat number 1. All right, so I will see you back here and we are gonna let our paint dry for exactly 4 hours. I'd like you to put a timer on your phone so you don't start applying paint too soon. Hey Siri, set a timer for 4 hours.
4 hours, counting down.
The recoat time on this is really critical because it is a hybrid oil paint. We need to make sure it dries really, really thoroughly before we put on another coat. And the reason we do that is if the paint is not ready to accept another coat, it will stick to itself. And that's called blocking, and we don't want that because the paint may never dry and will stay sticky and tacky. So please take out your phone and put a timer on. If it's humid where you live, like we talked about with the bonding primer, I'd give it an extra 2 hours or even wait overnight. It's best to do that than to risk it. Last but not least, if you are going to be reapplying the next coat of paint within about 4 hours, 4 to 6, you can wrap your brush, you can wrap your roller, and you can cover your tray and save those for later. If you're going to wait overnight or more than 6 hours, I'd recommend you wash out your brush and toss your roller in your tray and start with fresh tools in the morning. We'll call it in the morning because you're going to wait overnight. All right, so I hope that helps you. My body kind of hurts after painting this bathroom. But the next thing we need to do is very gently flip over our cabinets to expose that front side, and that is the last thing we're going to be painting. You should be getting 1 coat coverage, but if you feel like you need 2, you can always go back and apply using the same process, a whole nother coat of paint cabinets. Don't forget your damp paper towel and your face mask if you need it. I'm gonna put mine on. I have a little bit of asthma and we're gonna get started. So this is the most important side of your cabinets. This is the one that is going to be facing out. So take your time, turn the sprayer vertical, horizontal to make sure if you have architectural detail like I do that you make sure you get down in those grooves. The hope is you get 1 coat coverage, and if you have to do 2, you have to do 2. You're keeping the settings exactly the same. Make sure you get that paint flowing before you actually start spraying. Now I'm gonna go ahead and get started and just pay attention to the architectural detail, just like you did with the primer, and make sure you get into all those nooks and crannies. If you have to turn the direction of the spray, please go ahead and do that as well.
Here's a little more film footage of me applying paint and just making sure that I turn the sprayer to get into all that architectural detail and doing thin coats and using different motions to get into those grooves.
So the plan that you need to have is let your cabinet doors and drawer fronts dry in place for 24 hours. And why I'm saying that is because the less you disturb them, the better off they're going to be long term. We want to wait that long before we start attempting to put hinges on or pulls or knobs, because number 1, you don't want to damage the finish, this beautiful factory finish you just created, and it's just safer to do. The other thing is if you attach hardware too soon, it literally can adhere to the paint, and then the next time you want to change your hardware and you go to pull it off, there'll be either a mark or you technically maybe will pull off the paint itself. So definitely don't want to mess with it until it is time. Then what's next after that? We gotta clean out our paint sprayer, and this is going to be a more significant cleaning because you're going to be storing it after this cleaning. Now let's disassemble our paint sprayer and get it all cleaned out. It's important that you save this paint for a touch-up later, or say for instance something happens to one cabinet door, right on the top of your can that that's what this paint was for, is for the cabinet that you painted. And less, the more paint we let drain out of here is the less paint we've got to force out later. What we're going to do is very carefully pick up this bag, and you're going to see how much paint is left over. When you spray, it's amazing how little paint you use. So just pick it up with a good firm grip. It's nice, this is clean, we don't have to worry about it. No paint's gonna go down the drain other than when we clean out of here. I'm gonna grab this and create a little spout, and then we're just gonna pour it back into our can. Hey, I'm a fan of the liner, I have to tell you. Much easier. And all we gotta do is toss this little bag. Now that you have your paint back in your can, I want you to use something. I mean, I wouldn't use a hammer, but some kind of a mallet, and pound the lid on really tight. This is gonna get noisy. Go all the way around and seal out any air. This paint will keep for a good long time. Yay, it's installation day. You let your cabinet doors and drawer fronts dry 24 hours, correct? Yes, you did. I know you did. You're good at following instructions, right? I did. I definitely waited. It's always important to let them dry as long as possible before you reattach, because the odds of scraping get pretty high and you don't want to mess up your beautiful finish. So let's talk through just the basics of reattaching your drawer fronts and your cabinet doors. So you've got your bags of hardware, so grab all of those supplies, and remember that you taped over your labels, so go ahead and very gently peel away that painter's tape to expose your labels. Also, pay attention, because when you wrote them, they were directional for something like a panel or a drawer front, to make sure you reattach them in the up direction. So let's talk about order of attachment. I like to start at the top and work my way down. There is no reason you can't start with the cabinets and install the doors, but the cabinet's gonna kind of get in the way. So that's why I do it that way. It just makes it easier, because you can get your hand up under there when the cabinet door is not attached. The other thing is, be really careful as you attach your cabinet doors, and before you close them, make sure you've got your panel or your drawer fronts, and even if you've got a stack of drawers that you're installing, make sure they're nice and straight and even. There's a lot of play in those screws. You'd be kind of surprised how much play there is, but make sure they're nice and straight. I would err on the side of pushing them up away from the cabinet, so when you screw them in, you just kind of use your hand to push them up. And then before you really close your door, make sure there are no areas that are rubbing. Typically they happen in the corners and on either side. And obviously I've had this happen to me, and so I'm reminding you to watch out for that. I wish I was taking my own class. I totally forgot. So I had a problem with this drawer front. I put it on, I got so excited. It was the first thing I did. I put this door on, it popped right back into place, and I was like, yay, and I closed the door. Well, it scraped between these 2 points, so I had to go back in, adjust my drawer front, and get it straight and in alignment. But the cool thing is, it's super easy to touch up. Let's see, there's no damage that you can see here. All you do is get out your can of paint, make sure it's good and stirred up if you haven't used it for a while, and that little craft brush that you have in your supply list, or that you've used throughout the class, and just apply a couple coats of paint. Just let the paint dry 2 hours in between, and no one other than you will ever notice that anything happened. Another thing you may have noticed is I changed the hardware, obviously, and it's gorgeous. I love it. I wanted a really minimalistic look to highlight this beautiful blue shade of paint that I used, but I made a couple changes. So you remember that I taught you how to fill in holes, and so I changed this from a cup hole to a knob, and I'm so happy that I made that change. Then I changed this from a knob to a pull just by drilling another hole. So that's something that you can do as well, as you can change from a knob to a pull. I will link this hardware in the class notes. So if you're interested in purchasing this for your house, you can. It's in a polished chrome finish and matches all of the other fixtures in the room. So that's why I went with this. So I hope all of those little tips and tricks help you out. If you nick anything, if you chose a satin sheen, I'm finding that the satin sheen really touches up well, and I can't see where I did any touch-ups. I feel like I maybe nicked this just during installation and I touched this up. And I found that another thing that happened, and you may see this after you get your cabinets installed, that I had so much architectural detail in a couple little tiny areas, I could still see some of the primer through. So I just used that craft brush and I just ran it down in those little grooves, and you can't tell that ever happened. So don't be scared to touch up. Just be mindful in your approach. If you say you nicked an area smack in the middle of this panel, I want you to run your paint all the way across. You don't want to show any sheen changes or brush marks. So if you just take your brush across and strike it off the way that I showed you, that's an easy fix if you make any errors along the way. I wanted to show you the full effect of everything painted and finished, and also give you an idea of what a satin sheen looks like, so you can make a decision at your house whether you want to step up to a semi-gloss or you want to stay with a satin sheen. I really love the effect. It looks very much like chalk paint, but it's going to have high durability and we don't have to add a top coat. So really, it's the perfect solution to that problem by using Valspar cabinet and furniture enamel in a satin sheen. If you feel like you're rough on your cabinet, say it's in your primary bathroom, stepping up to a semi-gloss is going to be a really good idea. That's what I have in my primary bathroom. And I literally clean my makeup off with baby wipes, and it has held up for years. So it's really up to you. Just a little bit more shine gives you a little bit more cleanability and durability.
Hey, now that we're friends, please hit that like button, subscribe, and make sure you check that notification bell so when I release brand new paint tutorials or fun and helpful advice on decorating, you'll be the first to know.